Howdy and welcome back. So let's go ahead and focus on kind of the ability to serialize some sort of movie objects into CSV format. So let's assume that in our application we have a standard library vector of movie objects called, I don't know, movies for lack of a better term. And let's say within that vector we have our Gone with the Wind movie, as well as our Casablanca movie. And the question here is, our program somehow doing something with this collection of movies, and we want to write that collection out to persistent storage in CSV format. So we'd like to create a file called movie or movies.csv, whatever you fancy. And within that CSV file, we'd like to have exactly one line in that file per movie object stored within our movies vector. And we like the fields, so the attributes such as ID, title, rating, release date, description to be separated, to all be on that one line, but delimited by a comma. So how can we go this direction to actually create that file? So there's going to be a number of different ways we can go about this process. And I'm just going to show one here. It's kind of what I decided how I wanted to implement this. And there's many different ways you can go about this. You'll see here I'm going to do some operator overloading, but a function would have been appropriate. And I'll also go ahead and address here that I'm not going to encapsulate any of this functionality into classes. Instead, I'm going to provide it as bare bone functions. But if we were to be, coming up with some sort of way to serialize and deserialize our objects, we'd probably want to encapsulate all of that functionality within a class. I'm not doing it here just because it would be kind of a level of distraction. I want to focus on the actual behaviors or operations that we need to focus on to perform these processes without kind of having a lot of other things going on, which may detract or remove focus from these things. So anyways, let's say that somewhere, in our application, we have this collection of movie objects, and create it however you want. I'm just explicitly showing here that, okay, movies is going to contain these two movie objects. And I'm just creating them and putting them in this vector. And then I pose the question, well, how do we create movies.csv? And we want it to look, like this. So serializing those objects, so each object in that collection into CSV format. So I'm going to do this in two steps. The first step in my process, and I mean, again, it's going to be context dependent based on the outcome that you desire and what's going to be ultimately, working well within the context of your application. But for this example, here's how I chose to go about it. First, I'm going to overload what it means to insert a movie object into a stream. And how I'm going to overload that or define that overloaded operator is simply to write out each attribute stored within a movie object in comma delimited form. So and look, this is kind of matching the structure of the CSV format that I'd actually ultimately want to produce. Now, again, if you're putting all this functionality into a class, this might be designed differently, but kind of the takeaway here will be, none the same. We need to go from this movie object to this format right here. And this was my decision on how to do that. So with the overloaded insertion operator, I'm simply going to write the ID followed by a comma to denote the end of that field, followed by the title, followed by a comma to denote the end of that field, followed by the rating, again, comma to denote the end of the field, release date, comma, description, and guess what? At that point, we've successfully wrote out our movie record. So line feed instead of comma. Now, can I put this together to actually serialize this whole collection of movies to a CSV file? So for each movie, in my collection movies. I want to essentially generate this representation of that object and then write that out to a file. So how I'm doing this is simply defining a function called movies2 new CSV file. And I'm emphasizing new within the name of this function. Let's underline it, because I'm going to open up the format or open up, the file in a way that would overwrite any contents within that file should it already exist. Remember, if you'd like to say append to the end of a file, you'd have to open up your output file stream in append mode. Here, we're just opening it up. If it exists, we'll end up overwriting its contents. So I've got my file stream open. I'm passing in some sort of name. This could be whatever. I bind this stream to a file of that name. So maybe it's movies.csv. So we create a file called movies.csv. And then for each movie in my collection of movies, I go ahead and use the overloaded insertion operator to simply write out each movie to that file. The end result of this process, so creating the movies vector, adding the movies to that vector, and then writing the movies out, serializing them out in CSV format, we get a file called movies.csv with each movie from our collection of movies serialized in CSV format. So before we move on, let's just pose the question, well, how would you define the following functions? Let's say I have a vector of movies that I'd like to append to the end of a file. How would you do that? Based on your knowledge of files, I would expect you to be able to do that if you were asked to do so on an exam or quiz. Moreover, appending a single movie. What if I wanted to append a whole collection of movies? Well, that process isn't going to be all that different. But again, I think that would be a fair question too. So do think about these before we move on into the deserialization process. And then we'll continue on after that into the updating and the deleting of these records in persistent storage.